Putin's advice to Iran is very interesting at the moment. It's an intriguing and frankly contradictory role of the Russian president in the ongoing crisis over Iran's nuclear program. According to reports just coming out, Putin has privately urged Iran to accept a nuclear deal with the United States that includes zero uranium enrichment on Iranian soil. And the stakes are incredibly high. Enriching uranium is the technical step that can lead either to nuclear fuel for power or at higher levels to weapons-grade material. It's always been the central controversy in negotiations with Iran. Iran insists on its right to enrich, and the US and Israel insist on blocking this to prevent weapons development. The 2015 JCPOA allowed limited enrichment under the IAEA monitoring, but that deal is dead. It was killed by Trump, of course. Since then, Iran's enrichment levels have risen and tensions have soared. Axios and other outlets cite European and Israeli officials saying that Putin told both Donald Trump and Iranian officials that he now supports a zero enrichment deal. This is a stark shift from Moscow's public position, which has always defended Iran's right to enrich for peaceful purposes under the Non-Proliferation Treaty. Iran predictably has denied the reports. Tasnim news agency called the story false. Iranian officials have rejected the idea outright, saying they wouldn't even consider such a deal. The Iranian establishment regards enrichment as a sovereign right, a matter of national pride, and a deterrent. Here's where it gets interesting, because Russia has been Iran's chief diplomatic partner on the nuclear issue for years. It built Iran's first nuclear reactor at Bushehr, and it's defended Tehran at the UN Security Council. Iran, in turn, has supported Russia's war in Ukraine by supplying drones and missiles. So why undermine Iran's position now? One theory is purely pragmatic. After Israel and the US bombed Iranian nuclear sites in the recent 12-day war, Russia saw an opportunity to position itself as a mediator with Washington, and by encouraging zero enrichment, Putin might hope to relieve Western sanctions on Russia, split the US-Israel position, and recover diplomatic leverage. Another possibility is that Moscow wants to avoid a full-blown nuclear crisis in the Middle East. That would destabilize oil markets completely, and Russia needs high oil prices but cannot deal with catastrophic regional war. The Axios report says Putin discussed this stance not only with Iran, but with Trump and Macron. And this is telling. It suggests Putin is trying to position himself as an indispensable broker between the West and Iran. Macron, for the first time in 3 years, even phoned Putin about the Iran crisis, and French officials described the call as positive. France, still party to the 2015 deal, wants diplomacy. Putin is attempting to re-enter that diplomatic circuit despite the Ukraine war, and his pariah status in Europe. But let's not pretend this is altruistic statesmanship. Putin has publicly backed Iran's right to enrich while privately telling them to give it up. He's sold Iran nuclear technology while now proposing to remove their enriched uranium himself. It's a deeply cynical approach. In public, Russia remains Iran's ally, criticizing Israeli airstrikes and US pressure. In private, Putin is telling Iran to accept Washington's terms. So it reveals Russia's growing strain with Iran, and despite their military cooperation, Iran felt abandoned when Russia offered little beyond words during the recent Iran-Israel conflict, and that disappointment may have encouraged Moscow to play both sides. Moreover, Russia's foreign minister Lavrov continues to court Iran in forums like BRICS, while the Kremlin signals willingness to remove Iran's enriched uranium stockpile, and Moscow seems desperate to retain influence in Tehran, even as it courts Washington. So what does this mean? First, it shows how transactional Russian diplomacy has become. Second, it highlights Iran's determination to retain its nuclear sovereignty no matter what the cost. And third, it exposes the complexity of negotiations that are likely to follow. Putin's reported advice is unlikely to change Iran's mind, but it signals that Moscow is hedging its bets, willing to sacrifice Iran's ambitions if it suits Russia's global interests. And in that sense, Russia is no true friend of Iran's nuclear program, only of its own global advantage. It's a vivid reminder that in international diplomacy, principles give way to power and allies can become obstacles when interests diverge.